Oh, live streamed. Okay. I hope you're okay with that. It's being live streamed.
Wilson, are you controlling also the admission of the people, right? Are you controlling the admission of people? Yes. Okay. Basically, I switch on the meeting. Okay.
Yeah, I think now come more PhD students now here. I think maybe I can start with my small introduction, just that we keep time, no, because we have 5 speakers, and it would be a pity not to have enough time for all of you. So welcome everybody to the PhD Symposium, Human-Centered Architecture and Sustainability, organized here at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. My name is Henrik Thieven. I'm the director here of the school. And it's every year our PhD students in the School of Architecture organize this symposium, which is a kind of fixed part of their PhD program, and is then always supported by one of our teachers in this year, and also I think last year by my colleague Francesco Rossini, whom you all see here. No? So following our tradition, the students or PhD candidates are inviting distinguished international and local experts and as speakers and also as critics for their PhD presentations. Usually the PhD students that are particularly involved in this part of the program are in their first years of studies, which we find is also most important in this kind of early phase, that where really your comments of our invited guests are very welcome and appreciated, because they can actually still kind of also react to them. No? So that's very useful for their development. As a very new feature, this time, even though we always had international guests when we could, but I think there's a special component this time because of Francesco's relationship to the Politecnico di Milano, and a kind of very close collaboration with the Politecnico, which also not only we have 2 speakers from there, right, but also, as far as I understand, then I think 6 speakers, PhD students that also will be part of the presentations. Of course, we are very happy to have you all here, and so benvenuto, and I think it's still very early over there in Italy, no? So what do you have, 8 o'clock or something? No, so
9 a.m. 9 a.m.
So grazie. No, abbastanza presto. So we're very happy that you can join at this time. Before I will introduce all our distinguished 5 speakers, I want to pass the word to Francesco as the teacher of this particular course and also organizer with the students together of this event. So maybe Francesco, you can learn from here. Yeah.
Thank you for the introduction, Hendrik. So I'm super happy to coordinate this symposium for the 2nd year. This course, actually, it's a privilege because I have the opportunity to know all your research, right? All the research of the students, and we have also this opportunity to work together on this symposium. Since last year, when I was involved in this organization, I would like to make this symposium more visible, because we always organize the symposium, but actually there's no trace about what we did in the past years. So one of the innovation we did together is to create a website. So since last year, we have a website with all the presentation recorded, the abstract. So every person can have access to the website and see the research that we are doing at CUHK. And this year, even more challenging, it has been this collaboration with Polemy. which I would like to. This was, let's say, a test. Now it's a testing because the Polyme has been involved by, in a way, in a collaborative way. But next year we would like to do a work, let's say, this seminar together. So even in the conception of the topic, in the organization of this website and everything, we would like to do together. So to make the collaboration even more consistent. And this can be a way, for example, next year, this collaboration will be with Polyme. Maybe the other year we will partnership with another university. And this is a way for me and for the students to be exposed widely to other research institution, other way of conducting research. I think for especially for the first year would be very beneficial for them, even because the way how the course is organized is that the student will organize the symposium by themselves. So they will invite the speakers, they will write the letter, they will organize the poster, the graphic language. So everything is done by them. Under my supervision, but my little contribution just to see what they are doing. But most of the work is by them. So I would like to congratulate our PhD student for the great effort they did. So just a few little words about the topic. So the topic has been discussed among us, and the word came as a architecture, let's say, human-centered architecture and sustainability. So we struggle a little bit about the topic, how to frame the topic, but I think we give some general direction. And in the question underlying the seminar is, how could human-centered architecture be sustainable? So I think this is a very interesting question, and that's why we open up 5 sessions to investigate the topic for different angles. So we have building and construction, we have urban study, socio-cultural study, digital optimization, and rural regeneration, to understand how we can answer to this question, which is open-ended. Of course, we don't have answer to that, but we will try to understand more by looking the presentation. And another change we did in the recent years is to have a kind of pre-session, which we invite keynote speaker. So today is the day of the symposium. So invite keynote speaker that somehow give a brief introductions about the topic for the angles. And then on 28th, the stage is for students. So the students will have sessions where they can explain their research, and we have moderators and reviewers. So without just taking more time about that, I'll just pass the ball to Hendrik again, just to introduce our first speaker. Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks, Francesco. So Francesco asked me today to the students to moderate and introduce the different speakers that we have here. So I think we are very fortunate that we have 5 speakers, so 2 from Milan, and then we have 1 speaker from NUS, and then we will have 2 speakers from Hong Kong, and the last speaker in here at our school, and I hope that everyone will stay really to the end, will also be a great presentation by Professor Wong KS, who's basically the former secretary for the environment of Hong Kong. So a very strong, very important role in Hong Kong in actually implementing environmental policies and so on. So please all stay tuned, and I will each time just kind of introduce very quickly each speaker before their talks. So I want to start with the first speaker, who's Professor Elena Solero, adjunct professor of the Department of Architecture and Urban Studies at the Politecnico di Milano. And I think basically all 5 presentations will unpack different aspects of sustainability on different scales, architecture and urban scales. As far as I understand, seeing the title of the presentation, it will be City Sustainability and Adaptive Reuse. So I think it will probably also interlink these kind of 2 scales. So I want to give the word to Professor Solero. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hi to everybody. I try to share my screen. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
Perfect. Maybe you can make it on full screen.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Yes.
Hello, everybody. My name is Elena Solero, and thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm a researcher, and together with the Professor Pier Giorgio Vitillo, who was preliminarily invited by Professor Francesco Rossini to this symposium, work at Politecnico di Milano. Our current fields of research regard architectural and urban projects, spatial planning and territorial governance, urban regeneration and resilience. We follow some national and international research on programming and planning tools, with particular reference to interscalar dimensions of transformative resilient regeneration, aimed at the care of urban systems and fragile territories. I think I'll talk for about 20 minutes, so good listening, and let's start. No, sorry, a short introduction. Sustainability is closely linked to the fight against the radical climate, economic, environmental, and social changes that are affecting the contemporary city, and represents the ambitious challenge of the urban ecological transition. The proposed contribution aims at the possibility of regeneration programs and policies to guide processes of transformation of the urban environment, promoting a transformative resilience in the awareness that public space represents the scenario of urban civilization and culture, focusing in particular on three themes. The first one is the necessary transition from individual building regeneration to widespread urban regeneration. The second one is the need to encourage adaptive reuse practices. And the last one, the opportunity to plan an integrated system of green infrastructure as the backbone of urban and territorial regeneration. A necessary premise, we must learn not only, I think, to live with changes, risks, and uncertainties, but to incorporate them into our policies, programs, and actions. To do this, we need to improve the ecosystem performance of the contemporary city. But how? Promoting, for example, resilience to climate change and the impacts of environmental risks, but also expanding our view from the energy efficiency of buildings to the pervasive regeneration of urban fabrics, involving built areas and open spaces. Encouraging a progressive ecological transition aimed at combating climate change. Programming and activating not only physical but also immaterial regeneration interventions to be declined to the different territorial geographies, favoring contexts with weak demand and affected by territorial, environmental, social risk and fragility. Finding innovative forms of public-private partnership, for example, the community cooperation in its different forms before being an entrepreneurial mode is configured as a model of social innovation and responds to the needs of mutuality through the production of goods and services that enhance the centrality of social infrastructure, encouraging adaptive reuse practices, and then the programming and integrated green infrastructure system as the framework of urban and territorial regeneration. But what does this change of perspective entail? We need a reform approach to spatial design tools, a sort of planning by doing that has the ability to be effective on things. That means being inside practices and processes, supporting the incremental model of project modification at the basis of reflection on the relationship between architecture and urbanism, seeking a practical dimension of the discipline, able to mix with other expertise in order to be really effective. So working in the field. Then effective actions, but at the same time, fair, supportive, sustainable. Use of tools integrated with the history, culture, and materiality of cities and territories. Action oriented to the care of the multiple dimensions of fragility, based on an integrated public strategy of ecological environmental regeneration, and social, economic, and cultural valorization that are the key objective of contemporary city government to promote a good development of cities and territories. Action oriented to transformative resilience, through which public space becomes the keystone of civilization and urban culture, attentive to collective things, living, as an essential condition of the quality of living. Action that focus on the links between space, economies, new social classes, dealing with sustainable living practices, and action that can mix two different knowledge, the technical design, the expert knowledge, and the contextual knowledge, that is the local knowledge, with the local initiative capable of generating usable knowledge. This attitude leads to a transformative resilience conceived on the basis of the needs of the established communities, with an approach to the multi-hazard risk. First topic, the necessary transition from building regeneration to urban regeneration. I think that the quality of the building regeneration intervention implies the ability of look beyond the individual building and understand its relationship with the context, blocks, neighborhood, districts, such as to lead to the widespread regeneration of the urban fabrics, which in addition to the built-up areas includes the opportunal spaces, for example, green area with microclimatic function, public facilities, for example, by promoting their relocation and enhancement in peripheral areas, and the network of connection, for example, roads such as boulevard, but also underground parking. In any case, particular and renewed attention must be paid to the water resource, to the different scales of interventions. To understand what we are talking about, some data: per capita consumption in Italy in 2020 grew to 236 liters a day against a European average of 125 liters a day. In China, per capita consumption is among the highest in the world, along India and the United States. So good practices must be introduced in building and urban regeneration. For example, the dual water supply systems or rainwater collection for irrigation and drainage, installation of individual litter counters, installation of water efficiency systems, the paving, and the construction of green roof. These are some examples, some good practices. Here you can see an example of the paving realized in Milan, where a previously vehicle accessible road transformed into a pedestrian street was finally depaved. And the second example regards the installation of a green roof in Germany. But it seems appropriate to identify the different urban contexts, geographies to which different policies, rules, and actions of energy efficiency should be applied. The historic city to be preserved, but seeking the necessary compatibility between the protection of the historical architectural heritage and the objectives of the energy transition. We need to adopt a systemic and integrated approach that aims to define innovative and sustainable design choices through the identification of parameters and project indication. Enea, that is a national agency for new technologies in Italy, suggests 4 work phases for the historic city. The survey phase that involves analysis of building and context, meta-planning phase aimed at identifying the elements to be protected and renewed, a design phase where we decide the criteria of urban individual building design, and finally the check phase, checklist of requirements and performance specifications. In this way, we should try to pursue morphological ecosystem and fruitive quality. Then the 19th and 20th century historicized the city, enhancing its qualities and resilient characters, also from the physical environmental point of view. We can adopt a careful design approach to the urban microclimate. Some examples and references: installation of green roof resulting in microclimatic control, absorption of pollutants, reduction of fine dust, provision of cool roof through the coating of roofing surfaces with reflective materials, whose roofs can reflect up to 80% of solar radiation and are achieved by applying clear materials with a low solar absorption factor and high emissivity. The implementation of green areas, including parks and areas dedicated to vegetation, with benefit for the reduction of urban overheating and air pollution, as well as the increased value for the quality of the inhabitants of our city. Flooring with natural material and or with clear colors and high reflectance index that maintains a lower temperature, bitumen, paints, or aggregates. Then the construction of parking spaces with drainage paving, grass block or similar. And the last part of the city, the modern suburbs, promoting intensive and widespread regeneration. Here we can figure out design proposals aimed at promoting a contemporary urbanity, capable of mixing different activities and functions, but strongly integrated with each other and able to dialogue with the public space system. So modern suburbs as a sequence of urban spaces and widespread centralities, or parts of cities with their own identity, which are implemented over time and integrated with the existing urban areas. Urban fabrics attentive to the eco-sustainable characteristics and energy redevelopment, characterized by more performing and healthier buildings, able to relate to the context. The second topic is the need to foster adaptive reuse practices. The built environment is our most valuable resource. It's an active and vital space, and this is an important contribution that the city and its form can give to the long process of ecological transition in progress. Establishes dynamic relationship in time and space with society, environment, and economy. It's not an inert substrate of economic and social system, but an adaptive and co-evolutionary system. Buildings represents nodes of a complex and integrated system of relations. Their use of buildings is promoted by economic and cultural social movements that push toward a circular economy. Today, more than ever, their use of the built environment implies the collective responsibility towards the global climate crisis. And I use a metaphor, the metaphor of buildings as a chrysalis, where represents the extraordinary potential of the built environment, that is a transitional place of possible metamorphosis towards a vital renewal, capable of preserving the original patrimony of energy meant as ability to do a job, a generative transformation of new values and quality with only one condition: enrich the urban situation while reducing the environmental impact. 3 examples. This is CAIXA Forum in Madrid. It's a cultural center located in Paseo del Prado in a former power station, a disused building of which the brick facades have been preserved. And the second example is the Elbphilharmonie, a concert hall in the Hafen City quarter of Hamburg, Germany. The new glassy construction resembles a hoisted sail, water wave, an iceberg, or quartz crystal resting on top of an old brick warehouse that is reused. And here we are in London, King's Cross. Victorian London was a city powered by coal, and the Coal Drops was its coal store. These buildings were built in the 1850 to transfer coal that arrived from the north of England by rail. And reimagined by Heatherwick Studio, the Coal Drops are today a shopping and dining hotspot. But which are the requirements and benefits of adaptive reuse? Adaptive reuse of the built heritage is a necessary strategy to achieve a new culture of living, able to shape the built environment, strengthening social cohesion, ensuring environmental sustainability, and contributing to health and collective well-being. The adaptive reuse requires the adoption of an active attitude towards the built environment. Consider the existing heritage as a concrete reality to be reshaped, starting from social, cultural, environmental, and economic needs to hand it down to future generations. Promote it wherever possible, especially when pre-existence show documentary and identity value. Respect the complexity and the cultural stratification that is often lacking in the ordinary and uncritical practices of substitution, which go against the principle of sustainability. Adaptive reuse processes shall ensure long-term usability, flexibility, and adaptability to future needs. More resilience and sustainable cities based on circular economy principles, and the possibility, and this is for me very important, of testing temporary uses as real engines of regeneration. In addition to triggering transformation, they are useful to test the characters and nature of possible future uses, a tool for progressive development of economic, cultural, and welfare practices, not a simple transitional operation between the disposal and real estate development, but a process of infrastructure, social innovation, and regeneration of its capital. This is the local library in Netherlands. The building was a large industrial building built in 1932, used for construction and repair of railway carriages and locomotives, and until 2009. Since then, the building had remained intact, but unused. In 2014, the municipality of Tilburg decided to transform it into an urban space with which to celebrate the collective memory of a workplace known to many of its inhabitants. Here we are in Ruhr region, in Germany. The artists Dirk Paske and Daniel Bilonich built a pool located in front of the coke oven battery in the middle of the former Zollverein coking plant inside Ruhr, where coal was once baked into coke. 2 overseas containers have been welded together to hold the water. The pool has been emblematic of structural change in the Ruhr region, and it is an example of the social change and the newly achieved quality of life in this region. A concrete application of adaptive reuse consists in building contemporary community hubs. But what is a community hub? The uses are different: health, educational, cultural services, recreational, or leisure. They are open and flexible spaces, hybrid and despecialized space, adaptable, reversible, without too much design effort, made by multifunctional structure at the service of community, triggering a cultural and social process even before the design, involving the local stakeholder and the established communities. For some time in Italy, and even more recently with the National Recovery and Resilience Plan approved in 2021 to relaunch the economy after the COVID-19 pandemic, solutions and proposals aimed at reforming urban standards to achieve a renewed welfare, which increase the quality of local services, strengthening in particular the local health, public and private. How? Promoting urban regeneration project to reduce marginalization and social degradation, using innovative models and tools for urban management, inclusion and well-being, starting from ongoing experiences such as the Green Community, that is a network of public and private entities, organization, cultural institution, research, profit and non-profit, made available to school communities to support them in the implementation of regeneration initiatives open to city and their communities. An example, Base Milano is a cultural hub that produces social innovation and cultural contamination, arts, business, technology. It is located within the Exansaldo industrial area, one of the most important urban regeneration projects. Base explores new models of collaboration between public and private, non-profit social enterprise. For example, one of the possible reuse of Base spaces is for concert, but also cultural event. But even reusing old market, here we are in near Bari in Italy, reusing the old market in a very simple way for collective and temporary activities. And now let's see the third topic, that is the opportunity to program an integrated system of green infrastructure as the backbone of urban and territorial regeneration. Green infrastructure is the main element for the qualification of the soil, mainly free from settlements or urbanization, so natural, rural, residual. This is essential for ecosystem rebalancing and environmental regeneration of urbanized areas, enhancing biodiversity and ecosystem services for the territorial and multifunctional development of natural capital, and considering the territorial integration, the relationship between city and country, so urban and peri-urban agriculture, can be improved, identifying the necessary action to reduce environmental impact, maximizing food contribution by directing business towards precision agriculture and agroecology, assigning priorities for the allocation of regional, national economic resource, targeting funding towards climate change adaptation and mitigating measures. So a set of urban and metropolitan urban spaces, which, if well connected, can represent one of the fundamental elements for the construction of the public city and structuring the contemporary city. It is also suitable to promote sustainable use, well-being, and inclusion. For this last topic, and it's also the last slide, I think 20 minutes are, yes, gone. I chose an example from the past. This is Chandigarh Plan by Le Corbusier, 1950, in which it is clear the design of the city starts from the design of open spaces as the main framework on which the city develops. So I finish my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Elena. And I think it's very nice to see like various interesting topics introduced now for maybe our later discussion also. No? The question on scale of building regeneration towards urban regeneration. I found it very fascinating to see this slide about the water use in different regions. Then, of course, the relationship between kind of human-centered aspects and other aspects of sustainability. I think for us at CHK also very interesting. We have this kind of tradition of, because we are a part of the Faculty of Social Science, have quite close link to community questions and so on, but then also the question of how do we bring in kind of technology, other aspects, and also to see, and maybe, I don't know if that will continue also with the other presentation by Juliana, but to see Milano, which was of course very much kind of hit, or Italy in general, but also Milan particularly in the pandemic, and then a lot of initiatives and the question of resilience and coming back after the pandemic with some of those quite low-tech but very, very nice interventions related to public space or reuse of buildings and so on, right? Now I want to introduce the second speaker, which is Associate Professor Rudi Stuffs, if I pronounce that correctly, who is on one hand a teacher at NUS at the National University of Singapore, but also the deputy head for research at the Department of Architecture there. And I think looking at his CV, kind of a lot of interesting points. I think you are leading the technology research cluster, and also a very interesting project that is related to architectural and urban prototypes. I think in old days I heard from Jürgen Rosemann also about those things. Quite fascinating. I would love to know more about this. And also works on various aspects related to digital twins, which might be also a bit related to this and so on. And also coastal aspects. But I think for the talk today, according to your title, right, you're focusing on sustainability and well-being in architectural and urban design and planning, which of course is quite topical, like how probably also after the pandemic, how we kind of readjust, calibrate our discussions and develop our discussions on sustainability, integrating questions of well-being, as also already mentioned by Elena. So you have the word.
Great. Thank you very much, Henrik. Let me share my screen. Okay, I think you can see my presentation. So thank you very much. Yes, I wanted to emphasize the relationship and basically the integration of sustainability and human well-being in architecture, but mainly in urban design and planning. This is just a short introduction to kind of emphasize the point. This is a new building, well, actually 4 years ago on campus, the first new built net zero energy building in Singapore. And so there was a strong emphasis, obviously, on sustainability, using a hybrid cooling system where the temperature is cooled down to a much higher, I'm not sure, maybe around 18 degrees. The actual temperature inside the building is held at 24, 25. And so it's complemented with fans in order to create some airflow so that it's comfortable inside. Now, the advantage of not cooling down the air so much is that it relies entirely on fresh air coming in, and there's no air recirculation. And this, of course, improves well-being, and especially relevant and important, as we have seen during the pandemic, as it's not only improves the air quality, but also, of course, reduces the presence of viruses or other particles. And so afterwards, the building was also presented with the gold certification of the Well Building Standard Institute, the first educational building worldwide, the first one in Singapore. And so this is really, to me, is a very strong argument to not think of sustainability only in terms of the buildings or the built environment, but also in terms of the human well-being, that they should go hand in hand. And just to end the point, this is all about a new building, but we're trying to, or we're extending the same ideas and techniques to repurposing of existing buildings. Obviously, it's a little bit more difficult to make them into net zero or even net positive energy buildings. Instead, they are super low energy buildings, but it's perfectly possible to create an environment that is both sustainable and well for the human occupant, even in a tropical environment as in Singapore. But actually, what I will be mainly talking about is a research project that I'm leading, is a C-City interface project. It's a project that we're doing together with people from ETH Zurich under the Future Cities Laboratory Global program between ETH and Singapore universities. And the topic of this project is about the C-City fringes in rapidly urbanizing cities in tropical Asia, with, of course, an emphasis on Singapore, because we find that environmental factors place special stress on these coastal cities in tropical environments. Demographic factors, of course, are also important. They tend to be growing and high-density cities, and also economically, they tend to embed logistical hubs that place special stress, and that should be addressed and dealt with the sooner the better, obviously. So what we're trying to do in this project is we're looking at scenario planning for a net zero carbon city in order to mitigate and, of course, also adapt to climate impacts in Singapore. And so we have a relatively large team of some colleagues of mine as co-PIs, collaborators that we work with in industry and government, a number of researchers, of course, and most importantly, we're working a lot with students. So the idea is to work with students and studios to generate scenarios that we can then evaluate and compare and see what works and what might not work. So this presentation will mainly present some of the results of the students in the last year, highlighting 3 different projects that they worked on. So the idea of the scenario planning, of course, is to develop and generate potential urban planning and design scenarios, and we're working at various scales, district, neighborhood, the state, can even be building. And we try to support the students in providing them with the tools to develop their scenarios and to analyze them, of course, as well, so that they have some understanding of what can be the impact. Of course, this is all limited. We don't have, the solution available that they can just quickly throw out lots of different alternatives and just compare them. But the students are, of course, very innovative themselves and very resourceful. So when we're looking at climate change, we're looking at both causes and effects. So in terms of causes, of course, we're looking at emissions profiles and greenhouse gas emissions or carbon emissions. Of course, we have to focus on something. So we're trying to not look so much at industry. We are, of course, considering transport and buildings, obviously, households, etc., are our main focus. And so students have been looking at carbon emissions by land use. And this picture is a little bit tricky, as in the red part on the edge, that is industry, pure industry. So all the residential parts look really great. Oh, green, wonderful. But that's just because industry, of course, has, is a much stronger contributor to carbon emissions. So if we look at residential only, then we can see that different parts of the city contribute differently based on the building typologies, the urban planning, etc. And so this is, of course, what is most interesting to look at and to see how we can improve the situation. Now, of course, when we're looking at carbon in buildings, we have to distinguish between embodied carbon and operational carbon. This project basically only looks at operational carbon. I do have another project looking at embodied carbon and adaptive reuse, among others, but I won't be talking about that. And I think Elena did already a great job talking about that. So I'll be focusing mainly on operational carbon. So in Singapore, household electricity consumption is mainly relating to air conditioning, and then to a smaller extent to refrigerators and water heaters, and of course everything else. And electricity consumption is the main energy consumption. There's a small part in gas, but that's really much smaller. So this is what we're focusing on in the first place. So obviously a good start would be to reduce reliance on air conditioning. So how can we do that? I mean, we could try to convince people to use less air conditioning, but basically what we're focusing on is to improve the urban climate. The better the urban climate, if we can reduce urban heat islands, if we can increase wind flow, then we will impact the need for air conditioning. So students have been looking at mainly at reducing wind blockage and reducing skimming winds. Skimming winds are particularly relevant for Singapore because a lot of the built area height limitations are specified by the airport. And so a lot of the building just tries to maximize building height. And so then you get, of course, buildings that are common height level, and then you can have skimming winds as a result. So students looked at skimming wind flow. Well, basically they looked at the let's say the relative differences in building heights in different locations, and they also looked at the pedestrian level wind flow. I mean, I should note that wind flow in Singapore isn't very strong. So anything around 5 meters per second would be a lot. Usually the wind is not as strong. And so we don't really have to worry about too strong winds. Really what we should be worried about is anything that reduces wind flow, wind speed, and blocks the wind. And so this group of students looked at one particular area in the central business district, the Tanjong Pagar area. It's a mixture of high-rise buildings and low-rise traditional shop houses. And the shop houses are kind of all concentrated in one area. And then as a result, the high-rise buildings are all concentrated in the other area. And they used Butterfly to look at the average wind speed, both at the ground level and above ground facades of building, and basically also looking at the average of both, and then looking at different, so this is the existing situation, and then they try to well, optimize it by looking at different typologies, let's say buildings at the edges of the blocks and lower rise in the center, or the opposite way, where it's centralized and then surrounding is lower, or where the buildings are concentrated at the corners of the plots. These, of course, are larger urban plots and not building plots. Otherwise, it wouldn't make that much difference. And so they came up with some comparisons. So, for example, in this case, they call it the canyon, in which all the buildings are at the edges of the plots of the sites, and the centroid, where it's the opposite, where it's kind of like centered in the middle. And you can kind of see the impact, the difference in average wind speed, both at the ground level and at higher, and so also the average. But eventually they settled on buildings at the corners, so higher buildings at the corners of the sides, which gave them the best, or one of the best average total wind speed. And then they looked at other aspects such as grid size and building offsets and typologies. This is the very small grid size, which gave the lowest average wind speed. A much larger grid size has a much better impact. But of course, this is not quite very accurate because, well, first of all, it would be very difficult to have residential occupancy in such very high plots. And these high plots, of course, we're not measuring the wind speed at the roof level, so it also takes away a lot of the ground floor area. And then they also looked at various building typologies because obviously they kind of consider the tabula rasa. Okay, we kind of ignore everything that is existing, but of course there are all these shop houses, and we don't really want to completely get rid of it. So they looked at some adaptive reuse, where some of these shop houses could be extended in various ways or dimensions in order to have a more varied building typology and building heights. So, of course, another aspect to look at is road transport emissions. So it's not just about urban climate. It's also about trying to reduce traffic so we can reduce carbon emissions and at the same time also improve the urban climate, all the heat that is being released. So they looked at how carbon emissions could be attributed to roads based. In this case, it's more based on the capacity of the roads rather than the actual traffic. But there is, of course, a certain relationship between the two. And so what they looked at was kind of like a form of transport-oriented design, where they were focusing on an area, the Marine Parade area, which is on the east coast of Singapore, where there's a new MRT, a new metro line that was built. And because it's an existing urban area, these metro stations, of course, are on a major axis, but at the same time, the built environment is not really adapted. I mean, the metro stations are added later to it. So some may be right next to lots of points of interest, and others may be in a much more residential area. So they looked at the service population of the different stations, and of course focused on creating walkable and recreation spaces, so that accessibility to these transport hubs would be improved, but at the same time also the walkability next to the accessibility. And then potentially adding POIs, so points of interest, shops or whatever, to increase further accessibility and concentrate so that people can, at the end of the day, pass by the shops or do other activities, or if they have other reasons to go to these places, so that really this accessibility and walkability is emphasized. Of course, the other aspect is to look at the possibility of carbon absorption next to the carbon emissions. And so the students looked at the trees, and especially where trees might be next to roadsides, so that there could be a direct impact on carbon absorption versus carbon emission. And then the last group looked at effects of climate change, so not so much the causes, but pluvial flooding. So as you can see from these images, flooding is an issue in Singapore, not so much because of infrastructure, etc., but really because the rain can fall so fast, so quickly, over a very short time, leading to the inability of the infrastructure basically to take on. And of course, we can keep on extending infrastructure, but with climate change, these strong storms are only getting worse. So we know, or we predict that the average rainfall is actually quite constant, but moments of drought and high rainfall become even worse. And so students did a flooding analysis using Kangaroo, and looking at where, based on the topography of Singapore isn't that strong, So there's a lot of places that can go flooding. So they looked at stormwater simulation using particles, seeing where water is coming from, where water is going, and which ways it takes, and then seeing doing some what-if scenarios. So, for example, what would happen if we take away all the buildings at the lowest part? Okay, then maybe we don't have flooding there, but well, we're reducing, of course, the potential for buildings, and Singapore is very dense, and we don't have a lot of space, so that could be an issue. Or maybe instead to look at where the water is running, and maybe see how we can improve the runoff, basically. Or they looked at another scenario. This is basically just what if all the buildings were following the contour lines? So they of course, based on that, they try to understand, okay, what are the different risks involved with different areas, and then what kind of rules could we create for these different areas to try to resolve this. And what kind of strategy should we try to bring the water as quickly as possible together in one place, or should we in fact instead reduce the concentration of water and spread it more? And so what kind of workflow we can build in order accordingly that can be applied to different cases. So that, of course, is not solving the problem at all. So there is future work necessary. In principle, we could consider some kind of like a 10-minute neighborhood that is trying to be car light and includes all kinds of functions, including agriculture and recreation and some industry, so that we can really reduce over traffic, and of course create a better balanced and a better climate, and maybe distribute this repeat this over a larger area. I think I'm running out of time, so I will keep it at this. I had prepared a short video on the digital urban twin, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary to. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks very much, Ristos, for this great presentation. And also, I thought maybe, on one hand, you're linking now very, very intensively to the topic of climate change and zero carbon. And I think that's also continuing, I think, in the next lecture. But also, I think, because we have our PhD students here, it's, I think, kind of interesting that because in terms of research approach, right, that I think from what you're showing, how you use the studio, but also very much built on scenario building as a form of research scenarios design and evaluation then of that these scenarios, which of course is kind of interesting because it could potentially offer a direction to implementation in city planning and so on, right? So thanks very much for that contribution. And now I'm very happy to introduce our third speaker, Professor Juliana Iannacone. Is this correct?
Perfect, perfect.
Okay, perfect. So you're Associate Professor of Architectural Engineering at Politecnico Milano. No? So as far as I understand, your focus is particularly on decarbonization of the building sector, particularly also through cross-disciplinary work, which I find very interesting. We have also our urban studies program here and so on. And your presentation title will be From Efficiency to Adaptation, Future-Proof Technologies for a Sustainable Human-Centered Built Environment. So basically linking both the technology part and the human-centered, which I find very important.
Yeah.
So the floor is yours. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation. And yes, exactly. The idea of this presentation is to be provocative, or let's say, I always try to be provocative. I'm not always successful with this respect, but more than presenting, let's say, I'm going to introduce some researches I worked on, but I try to share some ideas and some even my concerns about the future of sustainable architecture. So I hope that okay. I hope to be able. Okay.
We can see, yeah.
That's perfect. Okay, so starting with the provocation, I would like to share with you this picture and asking to our students to think about what will buildings be like in 2050. We are in a very fast changing world, and of course we know nowadays that the climate change challenges will affect a lot the way we will live in the future, into the built environment, the way we are going to design and build our buildings. And this is a picture that represents a possible building in the future. Of course, it's a futuristic picture, but considering what could be the effects of climate change on our planet, this architect, Vincent Callebaut, imagined this floating city, considering the rising level of the sea because of the increase of temperature due to climate change. Of course, this is not the future we would like to have, because it's a huge change in our life. But anyway, let's say that climate change and the understanding of the causes of the climate change was the main driver of the global concern and global policies addressing this huge challenge for our for people on the world. And in many countries, of course, I'm going to present how the European Union, so our continent, our union, started to address climate change. Let's say that starting from the Kyoto Protocol and the latest roadmap developed and implemented by the European Union, the idea to address the climate change was basically related to the reduction of carbon emission. At the beginning, with a very low reduction, we in the 2020 we started with this strategy 2020, which just, let's say, introduced a commitment to reduce by 20% the carbon emission with respect to the 1990 levels. And then, because of the urgency of the climate change, we are moving towards this roadmap of by 2050, which is, let's say, almost globally accepted roadmap, which is to decarbonize our global economies by 2050. And this is, let's say, based on data which are available, we will see later, even by the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, because the decarbonization of our global economy is the only possible way to keep the increase of temperature lower than 2 degrees, which is, let's say, the expected reduction in order to, let's say, avoid more catastrophic effects of the climate change. And basically, all the strategies which have been implemented following this roadmap, this this commitment by several countries, and among these the European Union, were strategies addressing or going under the name of mitigation, which are strategies to tackle the causes of the climate change through the reduction of carbon emission or greenhouse gas emission. And basically these strategies, considering the responsibility of the construction sector and the built environment in general, which has which is responsible for the highest share with respect to other sector of both carbon emission and energy consumption. These strategies developed by many countries and the European Union as well were trying to address mainly the reduction of operational carbon, which are the emission associated to the use of the building, and so to the energy use of a building. Starting from 2020, in Europe, they have introduced a concept of nearly zero energy building, which was the first step towards this, towards the future, the 2030 and 2050 targets, which is basically a building well designed, properly insulated, so that has a very high energy performance because of the good choice of materials and design, as a very low energy requirement, so that this very low amount of energy demand can be covered by renewable energy sources. Now there is, let's say, a process to recast this principle, moving towards zero carbon buildings. But again, most of this standard and most of the performances associated to this concept mainly refer to the reduction of energy consumption. And over the years, connected with these strategies addressing buildings, in Europe, we have even another target by 2030, and which refer to the transport sector, which is to basically move towards electrical cars by 2030. Electrical cars means that more renewable energy has to be produced. And where you're going to produce renewable energy? Of course, again, over the buildings. And that's why that together with this nearly zero energy building, there are some, let's say, studies, some prototypes, and even some experiences already built to move towards plus energy buildings. So the buildings that are able to produce more energy that is necessary to the building consumption as well, in order to provide energy for electrical car. And this excess energy can be basically stored into the car battery. And this is a scenario which is moving. And again, in order to increase the energy efficiency of the building, we are moving even towards a smart building concept, which refers to introduce digital technologies within the building in order to optimize the use of energy within the building, in order even to provide information to the consumers to how to improve their behavior with respect to the use of energy, providing them with the necessary information about the use of the energy produced by the house or the energy provided by the network into a frame of a smart city concept. And this is when, let's say, we start to understand what could be the risk related to this concept. I would like to show you this building built in Amsterdam, the Age, which is an office building, very welcome as the most sustainable office building in Europe, which is basically a very high efficient building from the point of view of energy, with a high level of smart technology integration. Basically, through the use of smart technology, let's say it's foreseen a reduction, a further improvement of energy efficiency by 30%, in addition to all the other technologies that have been used. A smart building means buildings which includes thousands of sensors which collect data from people. And basically, people who work in these buildings, they are monitored through their mobile phone, and basically the system collects data since they wake up in the morning, since they take their car from their own private parking area and then move into the building, so that let's say the smart building knows when people are arriving into the buildings, when they are, if there is an available parking area for them, and even through the app, they can reserve a table inside a desk inside the building, and according to their position and according to the data which are collected by the app, everywhere you go into the building, the systems know exactly what are the setting points that you like, with respect to the level of lighting, the level of temperature and humidity. And if you move around the building, basically this cloud of information moves together with you into the buildings, so that you can have everywhere you go your expected level of comfort. Of course, this is a huge revolution and can contribute to, let's say, guarantee better comfort levels inside the buildings, even in an overall framework of energy efficiency, because it is an attention to the comfort level of people. But at the same time, people are considering data, are considering parameters to be taken into account into the design of a very efficient buildings. And as a matter of fact, the systems knows exactly how many people enters, what are their habits, what are their preferences, and so on. This is possible just providing a lot of data. And if we enlarge this concept, of course, we are moving towards the concept of smart cities, which are so common into Asian countries where, let's say, if the opportunities to collect private data for people are higher than respect to other countries. But basically, we are moving towards a future where the digital infrastructure will control our world. And even it's not just a matter to collect information in order to be able to have, let's say, the preferred, the desired condition in the places where I move, but it's also a way to push behavior of people towards some, let's say, virtual profile that perform better than respect to the other. And especially moving towards, and this is, let's say, where we are moving towards into a whole electric way of energy provision. And so adding more strength to the digital infrastructure to control this energy. We are even at the moment underestimating the risk of cyber attacks that such a fragile infrastructure may have. If we look, for example, to one of the latest reports of the World Economic Forum, we can see that cyber attacks and cyber insecurity are one in the top 10 of the expected global risk in the next 10 years. And this is something that, of course, has to be taken into account because, of course, it will affect our lives and our private information. And among these risks, you see that the first is the failure to mitigate the climate change. That's why it's really important, together with strategies for mitigation, even move towards strategies towards addressing adaptation to climate change, even if, again, this is the second perceived risk in this report, which includes, let's say, interviews from experts and stakeholders from several fields. Adaptation is a necessary strategy for our lives because basically climate change is already happening and the effects of climate change are already visible everywhere. And this is really important because adaptation strategy in some way should be really fast because the climate change effects are moving even faster than expected. And because as most of us are basically architects or designers in general, or basically they work in the field of built environment, because the decision we take today about the built environment that we are going to transform in the future are long-term decisions, or are decisions which are affecting the long term. It's really important to understand now what could be the future challenges. And I must say that they will be not only related to climate change. Climate change is one of the biggest challenges, but together with climate change and mostly associated to climate change, we have to face very severe challenges. This is a study that we developed together with the Royal Technical Institute in Stockholm, which is a research using climate morphing, which is a way to collect data in a long-term perspective, where, for example, we can see how the future temperature in North European cities in Stockholm changes in a way that basically in the future, not so far, office buildings, for example, will need air conditioning. And most of the office buildings built nowadays in Sweden, they have no air conditioning simply because it was not necessary, considering the temperature, as external temperatures were below, let's say, the expected comfort temperature. But looking at the projection, basically we can see that cooling will be a problem affecting not only the design of new buildings, but affecting even the existing building stock. And because of that, it's necessary to introduce technologies, for example, for improve to reduce solar radiation over the buildings, or shading solution, so to be able to at least let's say, use some passive strategies in order to control at least solar radiation within the building and within the office building. And this increase of temperature we have seen in the previous presentation as well is something which is going to affect the city centers, the urban centers. And this is another challenge within the challenge, even because if we look at the projection in these 2050 scenarios, even because of climate change and all the problems associated to the life in rural areas, people is going to move into urban context. And so these challenges will be even greater within the cities. And if we look at the world population, we can, basically, we can see that basically most of the people will be elderly. So even a growing population, but an aging population. And for aging population, I cut this part because I maybe we'll have some presentation later about that, will be strongly affected by heat waves in the future and create, let's say, urban spaces which are comfortable for people will be another great challenge. But let's go back to the topic of energy efficiency. So we see that people is expected to live in the cities, and if we have to even address the challenges of the use of renewable energy sources, we see that basically this will be a challenge, because renewable energy generation in urban areas will be very difficult. And even moving back to the concept of producing more energy, which is necessary to the use of the buildings in order to provide energy to the car, maybe it's not a good strategy. This is a study developed in Germany about the projection of electricity consumption in Germany into considering the target 2050. In orange, we can see the energy consumption of buildings. They will be reduced, of course, but if we consider what is expected by the increase of energy required by cars, or the increase in the electrical energy required by heating pumps, we see that we are not solving the problem, because again, the electricity consumption are increasing. So even the electrical mobility maybe is the not right answer if we just consider strategies that, let's say, substitute the current amount of cars which use oils with electrical cars. And as a matter of fact, we can see that most of cities are moving towards car-free concepts. This is a picture of Oslo, but even in our city, in Milan, we are promoting car-free districts, because this is the only possible way to guarantee long-term sustainability with respect to the energy production. But even again, this is addressing a lot the quality of life of people in the city. During the pandemic, we realized what could be the potential of having car-free cities. The congestion, just in Italy and in Milan, the congestion due to the traffic has fallen by 30 to 75%, and air pollution, which is a big problem in our cities, has decreased at a similar rate. And so this is something that we have to take into account, even because most of our buildings generally are designed even to include parking areas for people. And maybe in the future, this will be not necessary. I forgot to translate this slide, but basically this is an idea of adaptive building where parking lots, parking areas are designed in order to be able to be transformed into the future, in a future with no car, into office spaces. I just want to conclude this presentation with some consideration about the effectiveness of the strategy. I don't know if you know, sorry, this picture, this diagram from the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, which considers several scenarios, a combination of several scenarios from business as usual in red and other solutions which address energy efficiency in buildings or reduction for transportation or industries and so on. And these scenarios are associated to the expected increase of temperature from now till the end of the centuries. And as we can see from this diagram, basically, the only possible way to keep the temperature lower than 2 degrees by the end of the century, which, as I told you, it is the threshold in order to avoid catastrophic events which can compromise our survival on the planet, refer not to strategies which decarbonize or move towards zero carbon solution, but we need not only to reduce carbon emission, but we need to introduce strategies to absorb and remove carbon. If not, we are not able to address this big challenge. And that's why I'm introducing here a research that we developed together with the ETH in Zurich in order to find alternative way or to understand how the built environment can contribute to this, to the carbon removal from the atmosphere. Generally, when we consider carbon capture and storage technologies, we refer to some complex solution like direct air capture or ocean fertilization, or sometimes, many times we believe that afforestation is a good strategy, but the problem that the space is limited, the cost of this solution is too high, and they are not, in some cases, they are not ready. We started thinking about how to store carbon in the building by using the carbon storage potential of bio-based materials that basically during their growth, they absorb carbon from the atmosphere and fix it into the plant. By using bio-based materials as structural materials or insulation materials or other building components, we demonstrated that it's possible to use building components to store carbon. Generally, the most commonly bio-based materials is timber, with respect to other materials, cement and steel, which produce a lot of carbon emission, has this potential to store as a storage capacity. You see in the darkest blue part, a storage capacity. During this growth, timber is able to absorb and fix carbon in the trunk. In our research, we considered fast-growing bio-based materials because with respect to the timber, which takes 70 years to grow and so to absorb material, fast-growing materials like straw, hemp, and other natural material, they have a faster potential to storage carbon. They need just 1 or 2 years to grow. And while we fix carbon in these buildings, other plants are growing in a faster way. And for example, by comparing these fast-growing bio-based materials, in this case, and insulation materials, we can see that we can, after a certain number of years, while solution based on traditional polystyrene or even solution based on timber, basically straw, for example, or hemp, after a certain year, they are able to be carbon positive. So they are able to absorb carbon from the atmosphere, contributing to this decarbonization strategy. Some last consideration, and I start from this new this neologism, which is solastalgia, which is formed by a combination of the Latin words comfort and the Greek word algia, which is pain, suffering, which describes what is a form of emotional and existential distress caused by environmental change, but even by other changes that our societies are facing. And this is really important because, again, if we look at the future and if we look at the risks for our society in the future, we see that mental stress is one relevant aspect to be taken into account. And this is generally associated to the distance that over the years people are have from the nature. And so try to reconnect people to the nature in our activities, in our cities, in our buildings would be fundamental, even to improve health and well-being. I'm not going into details because I can see that there are several experts here with this topic, but with this respect, the introduction of biophilic principle in architecture will help to improve health and well-being of people. And basically, it's not a matter to renaturalize our cities, but using all the possible strategies to integrate nature in our building. This is maybe one of the most famous skyscrapers in Milan, which is the Bosco Verticale, the vertical forest, which is, let's say, high income. It provides apartments for high income people. It is not necessary to reach such a level of target because even the presence of limited amount of vegetation can be useful for improvement of life of people. And even in dense urban context, even the feeling of nature, of the providing feelings which can be associated to natural elements, for example, such shading systems, which provides an effect of dynamic shading as where in the forest, can be helpful for people that from inside they have the feeling to be surrounded by trees. And this solution, even if artificial, they are associated to the building. And again, the use of natural materials, so timber, the use of natural light, the use of natural ventilation, are all solutions that can help improving the condition of people within the building, improve their work performances, lower the stress, and so on. And this is even most important if in places for recovering, using natural material, natural light can enhance healing and recovery from illness. Or introducing strategies that instead of typically installation can introduce natural features, for example, in this case, to filtering water. It's a way to integrate nature, in this case, in a school buildings that can help even the childhood maturation. And of course, I don't have to tell you from the School of Architecture of Hong Kong, which are strongly based on social sciences, how the presence of green can help community to strive in the future. I want to stop my presentation here. I always put a picture of my two children which are my passport to the future, just to say that basically the challenges that are going to affect our research and related to the built environment and cities at different level will be really hard, but there is no future already written, and it's up to us to build the future that we will love to have. And so I really hope that to have given some point for discussion for the next part of this morning together. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Juliana. And I think we were talking after Rudy's presentation about a scenario building, right? And that we're actually in a dynamic process, which is, I think, also very important for students and all of us to realize, right? And to see like that actually many of our thoughts that we have about zero carbon, electric cars, and so on, they're all maybe great steps, but they might not be enough because there are a lot of other dynamics at the same time that develop. For example, from where comes the energy then for those electrical cars and so on, right? And also the health impacts and so on, and on the other hand, then your considerations of not only zero carbon but basically carbon removal and how the building sector could be actually a part of it, and the question how we at the same time improve our quality of living, for example, by biophilic design. I think also Singapore does a lot of this, and if you come to visit us, we have a little farm on the roof and so on, but it might not really have too much, but it is in a small scale. Those experiments, I think, are very important.
I already visited it.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Okay, yeah. Okay, so let's come to our next speaker. I'm very pleased to welcome another Italian speaker, Gianni Talamini, but who is here in Hong Kong with us as an associate professor at the Department of Architecture and Civil Engineering at the City University of Hong Kong, just down the MTR, a couple of stops, very nearby. He is also at CityU the director of the Master of Urban Design and Regional Planning. And so much of his work is related to urban questions. And because also we are a bit tight on time, so I will be quiet now, just saying that your presentation is focusing on the notion of symbiotic urbanism. So Gianni, you have the floor.
Thank you, Hendrik, for your kind and generous introduction. Before we start, I will turn off my camera so that you can focus on the slide more. Okay, here we go. I think you can see my screen, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So, esteemed professor, dear friends and students, I'm honored and delighted to be here today to share some thought about my ongoing research. I would like to thank Professor Rossini for the kind invitation. And I will also have to add that I would like to congratulate with the organizer for putting me just after Professor Iannacone, as my talk will be very much somehow related to what was introduced just now. The title of this symposium is Human-Centered Architecture and Sustainability, and the title of my presentation is On the Notion of Symbiotic Urbanism. What is human-centered architecture? What is sustainability? What is symbiosis? What is a symbiotic city? What on earth is symbiotic urbanism then? Instead of the Y factory, like MVRDV were proposing some years ago, we should today build a sort of what factory. And this is what I try to share with you in the next 20 minutes. In the last half a century, and increasingly after the 2000s, we were confronted with research and design frameworks that attempt to seek the reintegration of nature into the planning and design of our cities. The scholarly production is a sort of response to the limitation of the modern urban planning and the increasing understanding that the quality of our life in cities depends on the availability, quality, and services, what we call environmental services, of nature. As a young university student many years ago, I went to Bernardo Secchi and told him that I was convinced that urban planning and urban design needed a paradigm shift to address the current environmental issues. As 1 century before, at the very beginning of urban planning as an independent discipline, environmental and sanitary issues were to be addressed and were the reason for gaining public support. He accepted to be my supervisor, but he warned me, nature regenerates fast. At that time, I did not fully understand what Bernardo Secchi was trying to tell me. At that time also, I was living and studying in the north of Italy, the north part of Italy, one of the most polluted areas in Europe, where the air quality systematically exceeds any European and World Health Organization limit values. The 2 red spots on the north part of Italy are exactly Milan, where many of our presenters today are teaching and living, and Venice, where I was studying and working as well. Why is the air so polluted in these 2 cities of Italy? The answer is, among other, fossil fuels used in transportation and energy production. Where are these fossil fuels coming from? The answer is United Arab Emirates and Kazakhstan, among others. So how do these countries use the earning from the selling of these hydrocarbons? The answer is new cities in the most inhospitable climates. So I went to Astana to study such a phenomenon for my PhD research. When I was in Kazakhstan, I found out that the answer to that question it's multifold. On one hand, the understanding of raw underground material as a gift of nature, and the idea that human rationality and thereof machines are superior to nature are the main questions that we are kind of posed by an issue that were kind of proposed within modern urban planning. These standpoints are embedded within visions such as the one proposed by Le Corbusier. We're very familiar with the Plan Voisin and similar design schemes that has been forming us and shaping our cities. In Hong Kong, a very clear case among many is City One in Sha Tin, which to me is the direct translation of Le Corbusier's principle into a real urban space. The question is, where is nature? Even if we look at the original drawings, there is something missing there. Where are the people? So back to Astana, what I found is not only the limitation of modernity and post-modernity, I also encountered the Japanese metabolism movement, and that was a kind of surprise. The winning entry, in fact, for the master plan of the new Kazakh capital was drafted by Kisho Kurokawa, one of the leading exponents of the metabolism movement. The plan that you see on the top left was not implemented. However, it is set as an extraordinary example of an approach to planning able to make full use of natural resources and to design urban spaces in symbiosis with them. The theoretical ground for such a proposal can be found in the philosophy of symbiosis as formulated by Kurokawa, which, beginning of quote, combine the Buddhist idea of coexistence, or more properly, co-living, with the most strict biological notion of symbiosis. End of the quote. Researching, I found that that plan was not developed on a tabula rasa, but set as an organic growth of the 1963 master plan. The Leningrad Planning Institute, with the assistance of the Urban Development Institute and other urban planning institutes in the Soviet Union, was commissioned to draw such a plan in the 60s under, at that time, leadership of Nikita Khrushchev. The plan envisated a linear development in 3 functional zones: an industrial zone on the northern side of the city, extending from the railway line, a medium residential zone containing 5 districts of 50 to 100,000 inhabitants, and a final strip to the south near the river dedicated to institution and recreational activities. The linear scheme then had a significant advantage that it can potentially be extended indefinitely. The plan was the occasion for Shvarikov, a leading academician and director of the Scientific Research and Design Institute for Town Planning of the Soviet Union, to experiment with innovative approach in the organization of the so-called micro-rayon, micro-district, and the dynamic growth of the urban areas. The plan uses the green areas as structural articulation elements of the city. Each micro-rayon was planned to be served by community facility in urban green spaces, and it was provided with direct access to the green network and public transportation systems. And under that plan, I found a fertile scholarly ground on which its conception developed. I'm talking about the vibrant debate on the proper form of socialist city that took place in the end of the 20s and beginning of 1930s in the Soviet Union. As part of such debate, Moshe Ginsburg and Mikhail Barsh proposed the idea of a green city. Let's read together some excerpt from the writing, beginning of quote: "When a city is ugly, when namely it is what it is, with all its attributes, noise, dust, lack of light, air, sun, etc., we draw medicines, homes and villas in the country, health, resorts, rest home, green cities. All this medicine, a medicine which is necessary when a city exists, which we cannot avoid, but we cannot close our eyes in front of a double system of poisoning antidote, which is the classical capital system of contradictions. This system must be contrasted by the socialist system of prophylaxis, the system of elimination of the city, with all its specific attributes, promoting a settlement solidarity of men able to solve the problem of work, of rest, of his culture, as a whole and uninterrupted process of socialist being." While Ginsburg and Barsh, exponent of the disurbanist movement in Soviet Union, believed in a socialist city as the solution to the problem brought by urbanization, on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, someone who advocated for a different political system, Frank Lloyd Wright, also shared the same rejection towards cities. Beginning of quote: "To look at the plan of a great city is to look at something like the cross-section of a fibrous tumor." End of quote. On the top left, you can see a normal cell structure, left, and a cancer one on the right. So life against that, and the urban footprint on the right-hand side looks pretty much like the latter. So what is life? According to Giorgio Agamben, beginning of quote, "The Greek has no single term to express what we mean by the word life. They use 2 terms that, although traceable to common etymological roots, are semantically and morphological distinct. Zoe, which express the simple fact of living common to all living beings, animal, man, gods, and bios, which indicates the form of or way of living proper to an individual or a group." The word symbiosis is made of these 2 parts: syn, together, and bios, which means life. But life which indicates the form of way of living proper to an individual or group, not just life in its basic feature. We as animals are mutually dependent on each other and on nature. We need to live together with each other and with nature. Back to the Soviet Union, the translation of Le Corbusier's work, Planifiki Gorod, town planning, at the proposal, and the proposal for the disurbanist city were two antithetical approaches to urban planning and design. On the left-hand side, the translation of town planning by Le Corbusier, and on the right-hand side, the illustration publishing modern architecture of a disurbanized dwelling unit by Mosaic Ginsburg. So what is a symbiotic city? The one on the left or the one on the right? Well, the question is kind of rhetoric. While Le Corbusier was making fun of the disurbanists, their proposals are still evergreen. The two opposing poles are well represented here in the entries of the Moscow Green City competition. Certainly on the left, you can see more rational approach to planning with functional distinct elements, very geometrically organized, while on the right, certainly more organic articulation of the city. The attempt to integrate urban and natural elements symbiotically is also well represented by this diagram by Konstantin Melnikov. The proposal for Magnitogorsk is possibly the ultimate product and highest result of such a vibrant debate. As part of this proposal, while on the left-hand side you can see the linear city diagram which inspired it, on the right-hand side you can see the architectural typology that was consistently proposed by Ginsburg, Pasternak, Hojtovich in 1930s. This is an axonometric view of the same building, while on the left-hand side, you see Lina Bobardi's Casa de Vidro. I believe that all of you can see and can tell the similarity between these two projects. Here is Lina Bobardi's plans, sections, and here the completed building, and it was presenting itself in the 1950s. Lina Bobardi herself in the staircase and inside the house. As mentioned, in the American continent, contemporary to the disurbanists, Frank Lloyd Wright was envisioning a disappearing city as part of its proposal for a new model of a Newtonian way of living in the American territory. An approach that constituted the basis for a critical regionalism as defined much later by Kenneth Frampton. What is critical regionalism? Beginning of quote. The term critical regionalism is not intended to denotate the vernacular, as this was once spontaneously produced by the combined interaction of climate, culture, myth, and craft, but rather to identify those recent regional schools was aimed as being to represent and serve, in a critical sense, the limited constituencies in which they are grounded. Aalto's collage approach to building form, also as part of this quote, was addressed as one of the highest of such an example of critical regionalism, such a school, by Kenneth Frampton. Also, as part of such an approach, intellectuals such as Mumford and Wooster and Bauer work on the shaping of the so-called Bay Area style. Their fascination for the work of Alvar Aalto brought him to MIT, where he designed the so-called Baker House, the student dormitory. Although never defined as disurbanist, Aalto's approach to urban planning and design, modern and organic at the same time, was certainly attentive and sensitive towards nature and its symbiotic integration with urban areas. Here is the regional plan for the Cokemanioki River Valley of 1942. Here, an urban design project within the master plan for Imatra, 1947-53. And here, the architect's summer house in Muratsalo, the so-called experimental house of the 1952-54. The house has a fish shape, and it was developed, as typical in Aalto works, as a progressive addition of elements within the process of definition of the project. Elements which adapt to the topographic and biological conditions of the site. Few kilometers away from the experimental house, one of the most well-known work of Aalto, the Seinäjoki Town Hall of 1949. Kenneth Frampton clearly indicates such a building and the plan for the town as one of the highest expression of critical regionalism in the work of art. These drawings were draft plans, rather than drawings, were drafted in the same year by the Finnish master as a preparatory for the plan of Imatra. As it appears clear, the natural elements are the structuring features of the regional plan. Settlements are developed in symbiosis with natural conditions. Here, the final elaborate. Our lab at the City University of Hong Kong digitalized all these drawings and analyzed them through a spatial analysis and using fundamentally GIS. We were able to find a tight relationship between residential ensemble and the forest. In fact, the access to natural elements, or to forest elements more precisely, are within 200 meters for the vast majority of buildings. What Aalto envisioned was a city in the forest. Another piece of research, this time research by design, is looking at Hong Kong as the place where a symbiotic relationship with nature exists and can be reinforced through strategic design interventions. We presented such a research in the form of an exhibition curated with Paolo Vigano and hosted at the City Gallery of the Planning Department. We hoped to influence the current proposal for the so-called Northern Metropolis. Similarly, we involved local citizens and stakeholders to co-design the new territories of Hong Kong. Here are our students during the fieldwork in Yonglong last December. This is a 6-meter-long hand drawings that was drafted in that occasion in a participatory way. In our research, also, we are seeking to understand how the agency of the different social groups can be addressed by design. In other words, how we can live together in symbiosis. With such an aim, seeking for spatial justice, we investigate how people meet and interact in the urban environment. Here is the case of Nantou village in Shenzhen, which we analyze in a workshop hosted within the Shenzhen Hong Kong Urbanism and Architecture Biennale. Similarly, we use behavioral mapping to understand how people interact with and within the natural environment. As part of this research effort, it is also a recently published paper co-authored with Professor Rossini. Understanding how we can live in symbiosis with nature is crucial for designing resilient cities that can cater for our future urban and human development. So what? After many years of research, I finally understand what Bernardo Secchi told me. Nature regenerates fast. What we need to do is to leave the space for it and to understand nature as a form of life in dynamic evolution with the built environment and with us. A lesson that Dina Bobardi appeared to know quite well. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, Johnny, for this philosophical and historical excursion to help us to see our topics in a much wider perspective. And then nevertheless, coming back to Hong Kong also in the later part of the lecture, and basically try to imagine like going from, we had building regeneration and urban regeneration, and then now we are basically at the role of nature in the city. Also, I think an interesting thought of the city in the garden in Singapore, and maybe can we imagine Hong Kong as a city in the forest, or what would it be? I think coming now to our last speaker, I think it's quite nice that we have the chance to have somebody here who was very much involved in setting out actual policies for Hong Kong. I'm very happy to introduce Professor Wong Kam Sing, who started his career as a practicing architect. And in that time, very much focused already on themes of sustainability before, or kind of grew further, and then basically had this role as the secretary for the environment in Hong Kong SAR government, and as such implemented various policies. He was also particularly interested, I think, in the topic of waste, something we haven't really talked about today, but it's also one of the kind of very important sustainability topics, but also I think very interested in climate change, I believe. I'm quite sure. Now, after stepping down from this very important position, he continues to be quite important for Hong Kong. For example, he's very active with this and leads a program of countryside conservation, or the Countryside Conservation Fund, that does a lot of very interesting projects in Hong Kong's countryside, regenerating villages, and in fact often creating a certain kind of symbiosis between nature and human habitat. And he's also passing on his knowledge and experiences as a teacher at the University of Hong Kong, so the third university here present today. So without further ado, I give the word to Professor Wong. KS also how we.
Okay, thank you, Hendrik.
Thank you very much.
You all, is it okay?
Yeah, we can see your presentation. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for organizing this event and inviting me to be here. It's good for the PhD students to hear speakers with different backgrounds. I also have different backgrounds, even though I was trained as an architect and has practiced for more than 20 years. I became the environment minister in the last decade as a policy maker, overseeing the sustainability and the environment for the entire city. Now I left the government and became the chairman of a charity organization called the Wujiqiao. In Chinese, it means bridge to China. It's linking Hong Kong and mainland China, and to help remote rural villages in Hong Kong and the mainland to be sustainable. So today I would like to use my background to share with you what may be relevant to you under my 3 roles. And that will cover, firstly, the policies on carbon neutral city. I think for all of you, despite you would have different research, but it would be good for you to see the overall context in a city, no matter you are working on the urban or rural topics. The overall policies about sustainability should be relevant. Second, Hong Kong is famous about its super high density. Even though Singapore is dense, Milan is also dense in the European context, Hong Kong is much denser. Deciding something in particular the built environment in the urban areas of Hong Kong, would be a really challenging task, no matter where you are doing research or design projects. So I would share with you my experience as an architect in the past some 20 years on not only building design, master planning, but also research to serve the government in some 20 years in the past. Last one is that I'm now the chairman of the NGO Charity Foundation, Bridge to China, to help these distant areas, regeneration. Okay, so that will cover urban areas and also rural areas. Firstly, about policy on carbon neutral cities. That is the second climate action plan in Hong Kong. Okay, after the Paris Agreement, we published the first climate action plan covering climate adaptation, resilience, and mitigation. It's mentioned by other speakers. Therefore, PhD candidates, you should know the key terms. What is climate adaptation? What is climate mitigation? And I added a term called resilience, and I would further elaborate. So I hope you understand those basic terms. Mitigations, climate mitigations can be further as decarbonization. It's to reduce the carbon footprint. And this latest Climate Action Plan 2050 is to take Hong Kong towards carbon neutrality. As mentioned by other speakers, this will be something done by major economies, including Hong Kong. That's an overview. I did some research over a website. I hope they are correct. Hong Kong, our target is to achieve carbon neutrality before 2050, earlier than other cities, because Hong Kong's economies could be simpler than others. For instance, Singapore with substantial industry is more challenging for them to become carbon neutral. Okay, so as I found, Milan, Singapore set their target is to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. We want to be quicker. We understand the urgency of climate change. For the entire China, target is to achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. But I think many Chinese cities would like to achieve carbon neutrality before the entire country. We also have to understand the current state of carbon emissions. Globally, carbon emissions per person would be a kind of benchmarking. Currently, the latest figure in Hong Kong is about 4.5 tons per person per year. Milan, according to my search, about 5. Singapore, about 8. But it's apple to orange comparison because different economies have different challenges. Looking forward, I think Christian students should be forward-looking and future-proof. Is that for Hong Kong and for other cities, they have to compare itself and to become carbon neutral within the target timeline. And while the target is 2050, this decade, these 10 years, will be the most critical for us to transform our cities, our infrastructures, our energy and utility systems. So we don't have 30 years, we just have 10 years or so for the critical transformation in order to achieve the carbon neutrality goal. And there are two terms. One is to peak the carbon emissions as soon as possible, okay, and then to become carbon neutral. China tried to achieve carbon peak before 2030. That means within some 7 years. Hong Kong peaked in 2014, 9 years ago. At that time, the average Hong Kong people's carbon footprint was about 6.2 tons per year. By 2020, down to 4.5. According to our pathway, we would reduce our overall carbon footprint by 50%. And by that time, our average carbon footprint will become about 2 to 3 tons per year. And before 2050, carbon neutral. And as mentioned by our speakers, we have to understand our carbon emissions profile. Different cities have different profiles. I said Hong Kong is simpler than other cities with industry. Okay, so the three major local carbon emission sources are electricity, including supply and demand. 90% of the electricity in Hong Kong is consumed in buildings like these, your home, offices, etc. Second, transport. Third, waste. So in order to help Hong Kong to become carbon neutral, architects and those related to built environment should help to support more zero carbon energy generation, save energy, the green building, to support the green mobility, and to reduce waste during construction and also during the operation. As indicated earlier, for climate actions, there could be involving 2 or 3 key terms. In Hong Kong, after thinking, we think that ARM would be clearer in terms of actions. Adaptations, we refer to hardwares, including infrastructure and buildings when you design it, okay? Then how to make it to be more adaptive to the extreme weather conditions, no matter it's heat wave or flooding, etc. Okay, in terms of hardware. We also understand that the extreme situation of extreme weathers could be really unexpected. So no matter how we design our infrastructure and buildings to become adaptive, it will not be good enough. So that in some extreme cases, we have to have the software for people to mitigate or reduce the impact. Okay, so we call this resilience. That's the soft side. So we have to consider this in both cases in order to make our city to reduce the damages in terms of life and other impacts. I said mitigations can be say as decarbonization. So ARM should be understood by all of you and should be integrated in your projects as appropriate. And this is kind of the simple summary of Hong Kong's latest carbon footprint. It shows the carbon emission profiles at the corner, and also revealed that what we have done in terms of adaptation, resilience, and mitigation. And it also highlights what are the particular local challenges in Hong Kong, because different cities have different challenges. For instance, Hong Kong is lacking space. How we can deal with the situation in terms of climate actions. And we also have the strategies in terms of government and funding. We also talk about opportunities. While there are risks and threats, but there are also opportunities if we can capture the climate actions, then we can create opportunities in urban and rural areas. And then the center part of this leaflet highlight the 4 decarbonization strategies in Hong Kong. That is to generate net zero electricity. Second, energy saving and green building. Third, green mobility. Fourth, waste reduction. For instance, some speakers mentioned smart city. In Hong Kong, we are switching all electricity meters to become smart meters within a few years. By now, should be about half done. And I think 3 years ago, all meters will become smart meters in Hong Kong, and then we can have the facilitation to make our cities and buildings smarter. And it's not only to help Hong Kong to reduce energy consumption, but also improve resilience. For instance, during super typhoon, some places could be out of supply. But with smart meters, we can quickly, immediately identify where are the problems and we can help those people. The last part of this leaflet shows the pathway in which the peak, so as said earlier, in 2014, and we reduce the carbon emissions in total by half before 2035 and become carbon neutrality, carbon neutral before 2050. Here, I also highlight the extreme conditions in Hong Kong, because Hong Kong belongs to the humid subtropical climate. For those people, including guests, if you haven't been to Hong Kong, welcome to Hong Kong, and you can feel the forthcoming months would be very hot. 35 degrees may not be the highest temperature that you may find in Europe, but in view of the high humidity in Hong Kong, you would feel the impact. This picture would be very interesting that is only announced in recent months by the Hong Kong Observatory. You can see that since 1884, for more than a century, the day with 35 degrees C or above is really very rare throughout the century. But in the recent, say, 5 or 6 years, you can see the patterns has been changing with more days, more than 35 degrees C per year. And last year, really alarming, 15 days with 35 degrees C or above. If this pattern move on, all our buildings designed with the basis on the past climatology would not be useful, okay? So my message here is that climate actions, including adaptation, resilience, and mitigations, is something that you have to understand and integrate them in your project as a program. My second sharing is that I was an architect on designing buildings, master planning, and consultancy research for the government for more than 20 years before I became the environment minister in Hong Kong. Particularly, I focused on high density design. This picture shows a project that I was the project architect and research coordinator in 1992, okay, 30 years ago. Okay, that is one of the most pioneering green housing projects in Hong Kong. Could be as tall as 50 stories, housing about 3,000 households. Okay, completed in 96 or in 97 in 2 phases. That was a kind of interesting project, how we can integrate all the pioneering environmental design in a high density context and in view of Hong Kong's humid subtropical climate. There's an award-winning project, including the gold medal from Acacia, the Architects Council Asia, the highest award in our region. So here I would like to highlight 3 projects that involved by me. Within the highest was the project that I mentioned. Second is the Tung Chung Town Center development, that if you go to Lantau frequently, surrounding the MTR stations with the master plan areas by my previous firm, including designing the shopping malls, hotels, and many domestic buildings, housing more than 10,000 households in that area. It's an interesting alternative master plan. It looked like a long brick wall, but in fact, it minimized the resistance to the prevailing summer breeze, optimizing the lateral ventilation. Since 1990s, we did a lot of research together with Chinese Hong Kong professors on the urban climatologies in our high density context and our climate, so that we can help the high density designs to optimize the passive design, etc., and also optimize the microclimate to tackle the urban heat island effects and also improve the pedestrian with environment, etc. Third is a consultancy study that I led and supported by Hong Kong U Chinese U and other professors in Hong Kong and globally, is to how to regulate and update the regulations for daylighting and ventilation requirement for domestic buildings in Hong Kong. That became the guideline in the government for Hong Kong. So those are the basic information that you may refer to if you are interested in more about how to design with a high density context for housing. The other areas are about the regulations, planning guidelines, and building guidelines that contributed by me in the past 2 decades when I was the architect. BIM Plus is the Green Building Assessment Scheme in Hong Kong. Okay, I think that in Japan you have the Green Mark, and in Europe and other cities there are different systems on green building assessment. Basically, is to have a kind of comprehensive framework to promote energy saving and also renewable energy, how to conserve water, support waste reduction and use good materials, and also how to conserve land, and together to improve the indoor and outdoor environment. So it's a comprehensive system for Hong Kong, in particular for our urban context and climate. Second is the urban character map. Our Singapore friend talked about how to simulate the green environment and other things in the urban context. Hong Kong invented the urban climatic map for our region. I think we started research in 2003, completed in 2006. Okay, that is also contributed by professors led by CHK architecture that help the planners and architects to design buildings and plan projects in the high density context. Last but not least is the SPD guideline, the sustainable building design guidelines, led by me and supported by other professors and researchers, is how to at the building, individual building site level to regulate permeability for winds and also to require greenery ratio, etc. So we have means to regulate things at the macro level, city level, urban level, and also building levels, while BIMPAS cover district planning, buildings, and also interiors. So in Hong Kong, we have different tools developed over the years to help designers and researchers to understand those aspects comprehensively. I also decided various zero carbon buildings in Hong Kong. This one located at Kowloon Bay, completed 11 years ago, was the first leading zero carbon buildings in Hong Kong. I also visited Singapore's School of Design about 7 years ago when it was newly completed. Okay, we have different contexts. You can see that even though it's a low-rise building, but it's surrounded by really tall buildings in the context. So it's a challenge in Hong Kong how to understand the challenge in our urban context and humidity, high temperatures, etc. As mentioned by other speakers, there are 3 key approaches. Optimize the passive and smart design to save energy. Second is to optimize the on-site renewable energy. Last but not least is to optimize the microclimate for the benefit of the building and also the surrounding. The last one is about the distant areas regeneration. As I now become the chairman of the Bridge to China Charitable Foundation, I visited mainland China this month. Okay, 8 days, but covering a wide range of areas that was contributed under the Wu Jitiao Charitable Foundation. I would like to share with you 3 projects that was under the Wu Jitiao. This picture shows the first bridge that was designed by CHK Professor Albert This design was started in 2003, completed in 2005. Okay, 18 years ago. It's an interesting project. If you work in rural areas, the mindset should be different from that in urban areas. That is a simple message. Because when Albert led the project, supported by me and his friends during that time, we involved different engineers and architects. Some offered urban solutions that would not be suitable. We can build it with a lot of money, but it would not be able to be maintained by the local peoples because we left and the local people have to look after it. So we have a simple design, won the RIBA International Award. Okay, but this is really an affordable a project with affordable budget and also could be maintained by the local people. The water level when we built it is just half a meter tall, but during flooding, it could be a number of meters high. It is much higher than the bridge. And even the span you are seeing would be, say, boosted down. Okay, but it's okay. After flooding, the local people can, as shown here, can hook the span back to the post, and then they can use it until today. Okay, so there's a way that to make the rural projects sustainable. And it was really a pleasure for us to see the children and elderly to cross the river safely. The second project is a kind of wrapped earth building in the northwestern part of the mainland China, made with mud mixed with straw. So as mentioned by other speaker, it could be a kind of carbon storage methodology. When I visit it, it's low, very cold overnight. But when I stay within the building, it's very warm. It's really energy efficient, low carbon, and even could be carbon positive. So again, it's a kind of world concept relevant to the particular context of the remote villages in mainland China. The third project is in Hebei, next to Beijing, 4 hours drive from Beijing to that village. It's a kind of village occupied by the minorities. We work with a university in Beijing, okay? They took an approach is to engage the local people that could echo your human-centered design approach. Instead of having the project completed in a year, they took 6 years to develop the projects in 4 phases and to work with local people step by step. When I visited the village this month, you can see the ladies were very happy, okay? And you can see that the space were being used actively. There are old school buildings converted into a kind of village center. We also help them to have the village public space, etc. And that project, I mean, the projects in that village would be ongoing. So we would have the human-centered approach to help the villages to keep it energetic. Overall, I would like to share with you a message, is the so-called building environmental efficiency. It's a simple concept I learned from the Japanese professor. The concept is Q over L. Quality is about what you want. Well-being, health, comfort, you name it. That could be endless. But I'm telling you that you have to prioritize them. It could not be unlimited. The other side is the loading, how to impact the environment. And I'm telling you that, say, due to climate change, carbon emission is absolute. And that to reduce the carbon emissions within certain time frame. As mentioned by other speakers, if we are having delay in actions, it will become hopeless. So when you decide whatever, a city, a building, or a space, you can use this concept, Q over L. Very interesting. If you like to understand more about that, go to the Japanese website. They have the green building assessment for the entire Japan called CASBEE, CASB, decided by the Professor Shiro Murakami, our friend, on green building assessment for global considerations. To conclude, I would like to share with you 3 types of projects that was decided and developed when I was the environment minister. During that decade, I became the client, a patron, so I can decide the project brief and also steer the team how to design projects. The first one is an incinerator. Okay, you know that people due to NIMBY, not in my backyard, could be not very happy about this kind of facility. But you can see that this project could be very interesting. You can see the water fountain and even a spa within that building. So it's to demonstrate waste energy could be beneficial to the people. Okay, they can enjoy it and soak into the spa to feel the waste heat could benefit you. Okay, that is called a tea park. Okay, very interesting exterior. And also there was an opportunity. We'd like to have a cafe to serve the workers and visitors in the incinerator. Many people from Europe, Singapore, including the environment minister from Singapore, visited that tea park. They found, interesting. How come we could have an incinerator with this spatial quality? Okay, we asked the architect to be green, use minimum material to optimize the quality of the experience, and to be educational, to inspire people that they should waste less. Okay, so those timbers actually reclaimed them from the old Wan Chai pier when the old pier was relocated. Okay, you can see that the architect upcycled the timber into very lovely furniture. So it's a kind of example to demonstrate how we can provide quality, including educational, environmental inspiration, but use minimal environmental impact. Second, recycling stations in Hong Kong. The picture shows very scenic environment, but in fact, many of these stations are surrounded by high-rise estates and buildings. And there were objections by the nearby people to having the recycling station close to their home. Okay, so again, it's another high-density challenge in Hong Kong. So for the first two recycling station, we intentionally to make it more beautiful than it could be. Okay, we use upcycle old container, okay, to become the major structure, and use renewable materials like bamboo for decorations. Okay, and also make the use of the waste space. For instance, the last picture shows the space under a flyover. Okay, it was a wasteland. I used it for temporary car parking, but we improved urban space. Will become a very popular, safe corridor for people to pass by days and nights. At the same time, they can see the recycling stations and promote clean recycling. Not only new buildings, but also we provide recycling stores in old high-density areas. So we rent old shop space and to provide the recycling stores. You can imagine in Hong Kong, if you are the developers, someone would like to rent your space for recycling, what would be your initial response? Your next store could be a kind of restaurants, cafe, and the other could be selling mobile phone. Okay, so but we made the big food. Food design, minimal input, high quality, change people's mindset about clean recycling. By now, people see the effect, and even the most prestigious developers approach us and ask us, hey, please provide a number 6 recycling store in their brand new commercial shopping malls. It's a simple design, including simple painting, and also simple interiors. The interior design is not frozen. While it has about 3 years history, it's gone through 3 generations of design process, because we engage the users, we engage the workers, how to improve the environment. Some could be seen, some would be at the back of house. We like to improve the occupancy health, etc. So that we like to improve the efficiency of operation, make it clean, easy for maintenance, etc. Lastly, about exhibition. We decide many exhibitions by the school or by the government. We set the brief, ask the designers, architects to make them zero waste. It's doable, okay? The quality may be compromised because it would have constraint, but we have to realize that constraint could be good for our sustainability. At the same time, we have to minimize the environmental impact. So the overall message is that less is more, doing more with less. And that's my message for PhD students. Thank you. If you'd like to understand more information, our website, climateready.govhk, could provide you more information, our policies. I hope all of you, no matter your projects are related to climate change or not, be climate ready. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Professor Wong, Case. And I think it's great to see your passion, even after quite some time in the government, you kept on the passion to really push forward all those kind of great initiatives and really make a big jump for Hong Kong in all those developments. I think thanks for all the speakers. The way it was planned is basically that now there would be a break, and then because we didn't have any time for discussions, right? We kept that till the end, that then we have a discussion and Q&A. Francesco, shall we make we are a little bit kind of late, but shall we still say maybe a 5 minutes break or something that people can go to bathrooms and so on? And when shall we come back? Is it 45 or 40? 45?
Yes.
Okay. So I say again, thank you for all the great presenters. And then after the break, Francesco will take over and lead the discussion. I will still stay here, but yeah. Okay.
See you soon. 10
Yes,
minutes. I think we can start. So I would like to thank all the speakers for the enlightened presentation. I really appreciate a lot of notes in my book. So because I think it's I appreciate the different angles of the presentation, and also from planning perspectives to building solutions. Also, as Rudy showed, the involvement of the students, in creating scenario, which I also appreciate, because this is what we are entitled to do, right? So even work with our students to let them embrace the challenge that we are facing right now. Also, it was an interesting digression about history, philosophy of Gianni, which remind us how we have to live with nature. And also some actions that Hong Kong is taking, which Professor Wong showed us. So I just have a reflection when I saw all the presentation, always in my mind were two ideas. So one that actually it seems kind of the time similar to the post-liberal city. So when during the industrialization of UK, there was this idea of freedom to the private interest. So the city became very polluted, and new technologies, let's say the freedom of changing part of the city without any action of the public, right? And in some point there was a serious implication of public into the planning of cities. And we have two great examples, I think. One, it was Paris with Haussmann plans that actually was realized in just 40 years. And also the plan of Barcelona. And they realized the new city, right, with new ideas to somehow responding to the problems of the industrial city, of the liberal city. And there was serious actions to somehow create good condition for people to live. So in mind, there was creating a good urban environment. And there was a sentence I always remember from Cerdà, when he says, urbanize the rural and ruralize the urban. So the new plan of Barcelona have this intention, right? To somehow envision a new model of city. Now, in all the presentation I've seen, it seems that all the action we know the problems, we know the solutions, but it seems that the city planning is not really taking comprehensive and serious actions to somehow transform this into something, a new vision. So for me, all this, what we see today, just like samples, actions which are not at this moment have embraced the vision of the new city. I think that Juliana, when you show these images, about this project, especially the first slide, shows city of the future. So, but my questions for you is, which kind of city are we thinking, or at least the idea of this new city? Is there any plan at this stage, any vision for the city of the future? Because you show something which is very utopic, but is using the existing resources, like, as adapting reuse, is creating new model of living, is implementing new types of infrastructure. So what are the actions that we have to take, right, to realize the vision of a much more sustainable future? So this is a question, it's an open question. So I hope any one of the guests can start to answer my reflection.
Maybe I can start first, as you mentioned, the picture I showed, the topic. Of course, that is an utopia, and I would like that this utopia will be never realized. I would like to comment your first point about the problems related to city planning. I must say that even looking at several studies, or let's say several studies from people who are more expert than me related to this, that basically the main problem is not at the level of city planning, but at the level of governmental planning. So for cities are most active in addressing these challenges that the national government. And this is the gap. As a matter of fact, most of the, let's say, the best practices that we see around the world are based on the action developed at the city level from city governments. And I remember a very interesting studies that basically the city level government or the decision-making processes at the level of the cities can be really effective addressing these challenges, because cities include all the necessary expertise and all the necessary level of decision making. And so at the same time, you can take this decision on some complex matters related to the city planning activities that at governmental level takes more time. So we have this gap now. Cities are taking action, but the national government, or even in the case of European Union or the United States, the federal government, are slower with this respect. And we can see also that many actions comes from bottom up, so come from people. And because they are reorganizing the way they live in a way that's starting from circular economy, or even the way their people is going to use public space is something that starts from people, not from government in many cases. So I guess that if we have a future, is because people are understanding that we have to go into a different direction. Unfortunately, I must say that even in Europe, national governments and European governments, even because we are facing a huge crisis nowadays, I must say, in our democracies, they are expected to slow the process, but people know. So and I want to strongly believe in the power of people.
Let me say something. Okay, given my background, that I was an architect, and also.
Can you come here, maybe?
Can you hear?
Can you hear Professor Wong?
Can you hear? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, there are 3 examples in Hong Kong. The first one, as asked by Mariam here, is that during my term as the environment minister, we approved a project is to develop a zero carbon eco village on a restored landfill site. So it's to make use of wasteland, okay, to demonstrate how to, say, at a small scale, to become carbon neutral in Hong Kong's high density context, and also in subtropical climate. That will be completed luckily this year. There will be another demonstration of zero carbon buildings in Hong Kong on a site with constraints, you say, restored landfill site. Second examples are about master planning. When I was an architect, I worked on at least 2 carbon neutral master plans. One for the 3rd phase of the science park next to China Zoo. Because the 2nd stage of master planning was not that conscious about the carbon emissions reduction. So they engaged a team of architects to help them to replan the master plan for phase 3. So if you are going to visit Science Park close to China Zoo, you can see the difference in terms of layout between these first 2 phases and the 3rd phase that they are developing. For the West Kowloon Cultural District, the master plan team comprising Norman Foster and my office. Okay, we were partners for winning the competition for the master plan for West Kowloon Cultural District. That is again a carbon neutral design at the master plan stage. Certainly, up to that stage, due to different constraints, as mentioned by our friends speakers here, that the implementation may be deviating from the original concept. Last examples are about the new development areas in Hong Kong. And there are two major, we call it NDAs in Hong Kong. One is the Northern Metropolis. The other is the Central Reclamation. I made a policy with my colleagues in the government. They have to be carbon neutral in terms of the overall planning in order to be future-proof. So even though the governments have been busy, but we did not forget the importance to make our opportunities in terms of development to be as green as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Anna, you were started talking before. You want to say something?
Yes, thank you, Francesco. Yes, no, I think we can really know what future will be because future change very fast, but we have to imagine it with what we already have, trying to be our best to save our resources. To do a concrete example, I appreciate the example showed by Juliana about the building in Cincinnati, where the first two levels were used for parking, but they are adaptable for other uses, for maybe for offices when car will be not used. I don't know, maybe in 50 years we will fly. I don't know if cars are present or not, but adapt our choices to the reality, trying to imagine what it will be. I think it's and saving our resources and trying to do the best is our task. And if I think to a sentence by Saint-Exupéry, he said that as for future, your task is not to foresee it, but to enable it. I think this is the best attitude that we have to have towards the next generation.
Thank you, Elena. So, Gianni, which city can be the Paris of the future, the Barcelona? Do we have a new Hauserman to envisioning Ocerda, to envisioning a new future?
Well, that's a very difficult
historical context.
That's a very difficult question.
That's for you, this.
Or Robert Moses in the case of New York, right?
Yeah.
But well, China has that kind of very big central power that can, really redirect things quickly. So differently than maybe other parts of the world. So maybe even here, in China, things can happen, and if there is the willingness to do so. So I really hope that 2060 could be like 2050 maybe to address the climate change issue. But yeah, I'm not sure where. I see a lot of work also done in other parts of the world to kind of address those countries that are more like I'd say looking forward in the future. Also, they're trying to decarbonize and change the energy structure of their cities. But there are big questions that still remain to be answered, like which kind of urban form is the most sustainable, and yeah, how to reach that. We are working. There is a PhD student here under my supervision. She actually worked on that, both in the case of Hong Kong and Africa as well, trying to understand what is the form that can cater like a sort of balance of local harvesting of energy and then consumption that is comparable to that harvesting. Because the problem is that when you have such a density as in Hong Kong, it's very difficult to harvest energy locally. There are like plans for big windmill farm, and as well like there is photovoltaics parks that are growing in the new territories, etc. But this is a very limited territory. So if you need surface to collect energy sustainably. And same with Singapore, very difficult. And on the other hand, the compact like structure of the city leads to very, very good performance in terms of transportation. So most of the European and even worse American cities consume a lot of energy in transportation, while here we rely a lot on the MTR, mass transit. So like 90 or something % of the population use that daily. And this leads to a very small consumption in terms of transport related energy. So, but the building level, we do quite not good at all, quite bad actually. So there is a lot to do here in Hong Kong. I think that big things is like a big component will be the civil society. And so I really appreciate the work that I see today by Professor Wong that is actually putting this into practice and kind of do something because as a scholar, we can do relatively small in changing things. We can kind of open ideas and demonstrate solutions, but it's very difficult. And so it's very important to have all the civil society on the same piece, and as well as like getting a sensitivity towards these issues is very urgent, very, very urgent everywhere. So I believe even here in Hong Kong, we need a lot of work to be done in that sense. Unfortunately, the risk is a lot of greenwashing. What you already envision manywhere is like greenwashing. So like we sell like a lot of green architecture and so on by just saving 20% energy or 30% energy or offsetting the carbon footprint to other areas of the world. That's most of the case what is happening. So we also need to, that's a big risk because this might undermine this effort, this collective effort. Yeah.
May I add that? Okay. We have to look at the overall pictures as mentioned. Say the overall carbon footprint in different cities, the carbon footprint per person, with the absolute objective data that each economies have to submit to the United Nations. So Hong Kong, cutting from 6.2 tons per person to 4.5 tons by 2020, and probably in this few years, cut to about 3 tons per person. Not easy, but we are doing that. I would like to add that universities should be the showcase. China Sea Hong Kong pledged to become carbon neutral by 2038. Hong Kong USD, I met earlier, they are going to announce a similarly aggressive target. CDU, since you are there, how you call it, to set the carbon neutral target. We are, when we were in the government, we mobilized all the big companies in Hong Kong. They are managing and own a lot of buildings. Ask them, each of them, to set their carbon neutrality target. That is something that we are pushing. We may not see the result today, but when they are forming their target one by one, then we will see a clearer picture. Because in Hong Kong, while there are many buildings, but in fact, the most of the energy are consumed in large-scale commercial buildings, hotels, shopping malls, etc. So we do have a strategy to tackle the big boys, to tackle them. I think Singapore is doing something similar to ask the large companies, the corporations, to be the leaders to reduce the carbon footprint in very clear, objective manner. Thank you.
I think also there's something, because of course we have different urban conditions. So we have informal city, we have high density city, we have compact city, we have rural area. So I believe, of course, there's no one solution that can accommodate the problems of different conditions. So I believe that there should be, and there will be, specific action for each settlement, right? Because probably a rural village, or at least a suburbs, is consuming in a different way than an high density city. So I think the measures that we discuss are somehow general, so we know the problem, but then the application of measure has to really be specifics to the context, which belong also to different climate zone. I think a spread suburb in Stockholm is not the same of in whatever Texas, right? So I think those elements, I think somehow has to be taking the pictures, and that's why probably it's difficult to imagine the kind of ideal city for the future, because at very specific conditions, but also because the symposium is about human-centered architecture and sustainability. And also I would like to link with the Rudy work. So which implication architecture as a design educator, how we can work with the students and change the paradigm of how we teach architecture, because sometimes can be a new challenge for us. So embrace those issue into the curricula and really design for that. I think I believe sometimes I'm not ready for that. No, but I have to learn. Like probably we have to learn to really take this in the curriculum and really challenge ourselves and the student for that, because we still design building with old mindset, I will say, old school, but then I think we have to change. We have to be the first to change that. So can I have the thought of Rudy?
Sure. Yeah, I fully agree, and we have to give the right example. We have to set the right example for our students. I mean, I talked about our net zero now positive net positive energy building. But in fact, before we had that building and before the others were renovated, we were setting a really bad example, because the buildings in which we were using are from the 70s, so they're not really designed with sustainability in mind. They were dark inside, so because we wanted to keep out the sun. Any glare, so it was kind of dark inside, so you had to have lights on all the time. You have central cooling, so it became quite cold in it, and then when students found it too cold, they would open the window and all the cold air would just go outside, and it's a huge waste of energy. But the building wasn't designed to allow occupants to be sustainable. So, that's finally when we built a new building, we were able to convince the university that, we had to put in these measures. We had to design it as an example, not just for ourselves, for our students, but also for the university. And now we have, of course, buildings that are much better adapted to the occupants. And the university, also appreciates it now very much, in such that they set out to make the campus net zero by 2030. It's a short time frame. I'm not sure how this can be achieved for the whole campus, but at least it's a start, right? This is about the examples that we set, that Giuliani was also talking about. We have to start somewhere. And I think that, of course, we have advantages, right? As a university campus, buildings aren't necessarily high-rise. They're usually low to mid-rise. We can open windows, etc., which you might not be able to do in a high-rise. We have, all kinds of possibilities. So it's not that this solution can just be rolled out over the entire country. And I can give another example. Singapore has very, like Hong Kong, has very good public transportation. But when you walk around in Singapore, you do realize that the city is planned, is organized around the car. It's actually much easier to get around by car than it is, even with very good public transportation, or then walking, because you're having to cross the street is not as straightforward because priority is given to a car. So how to change that, right? We can all imagine how the city should look like in the future, how we can have a car light, etc. But it's not that it's not the solution that is a problem. It is how we transition to that, right? And I think I think it's very important to work with students so that they understand what are the issues, how can we go about it. And these students, of course, these architecture students will influence practice, will influence planning, will influence a large part of the community. And it's an investment. And I don't know if we have enough time, obviously, because it is very critical. But yeah, this is what we need to do.
Okay, so I would like just address the same question to all of you. How could human-centered architecture be sustainable? Now, by looking at all these examples, putting the human at the center of the architecture, is sustainable, or we have to have other parameters? Because this is the question we try to answer.
May I start first to break the ice? I believe that the answer is very simple. It's embedded within the word sustainability and its translation into French. In French, you would say durabilité instead of sustainability. And when a building is, we are talking like Rudy was just mentioning, Juliana as well, and all of us, we're talking about even what in Hong Kong, and obviously Casey Wong, we were talking about adaptive reuse. We are talking about retrofitting the built environment. And I think that's very key, move, because a lot of energy is actually within the construction of a building rather than its lifespan. So if we extend the life of the building longer, then we already reach a lot of targets. And if we do that, then this built environment can also provide us with a very rich cultural materials that surround us, because the building is telling a story, of those that have been using it before. It's a lot. It's like a book. And if you just all the time erase and start, Rudy was mentioning tabula rasa, all the time through a tabula rasa, as we often do, that's very bad, both in terms of energy and also in terms of culture and the opportunities that we are given within that very rich built environment that we have, for instance, in many parts here in Hong Kong.
If I may add to that, just following up, it means that we need to build more flexibly, right? So that these buildings after 10, 20, 30 years, we can adapt them to new needs. I mean, now public housing in Singapore, they're trying to get away with interior walls so that the occupants can organize it themselves in whatever way they want, but it also means it is much easier later on to adapt it to new needs of new occupants, changes. This is so important because otherwise it's just, people don't want to reuse buildings because they feel that it's no longer adapting to the people, to the occupants.
Yes, I agree with Gianni and Rudy both. I think we have to be attentive and careful. We have to practice adaptive reuse, and we have to be flexible. Before I cited the example of parking, not only underground, but maybe in a different way, because we have to think the future changing. And we have, I think, to act in different way, in different using different parameters, depending on where we are. You told before, Francesco, but also in terms of money, finance. I don't know in Hong Kong, but here in Italy, there are a lot of fragile territories that can't obtain some money. Milan situation is different because it's a great city. So I think we have to be different, and we have to respect the different geographies of our territory, wherever we are.
Yes, and basically the title of my presentation, From Efficiency to Adaptation, is because as Rudy told before, sometimes efficiency can be in contraposition with adaptation, because basically we have tried to optimize whatever, even using algorithms, and now we are introducing artificial intelligence to optimize things. But basically the problem is that too much efficiency is not able to allow for future reconfiguration of the space that we are going to create, because efficiency is efficient at that time in that space, but climate is changing, temperature is changing, so even the context will be not the same, and uses and requirements and needs will be not the same. So this is a mindset, of course, and because for existing buildings, it means to try to keep them longer. For new building means to understand if we need, as in the past, buildings which are long lasting. So it's a completely different mindset.
Okay, I'm the last one. Probably I would like to reiterate the point I have shown on my PowerPoint. The concept of the building environmental efficiency, Q over L. Q related to the human desire, what we want. For instance, we want the space to be more flexible. It's okay, right? They could cater for social and economic reasons, okay? But at the same time, when we design for something to be more flexible, they are premium, right? They have to input more resources during the design and construction, right? So it's related to the loading, environmental loading. So it's always a balance between that, and it's a linkage between the human and the environment. So that's my simple answer.
I think it's good, this sort of conclusion, because I underline my questions. If the building changed, but I think we have to change our attitudes, right? So I think there's no only physical change of the construction. Probably we have to also adapt ourselves to new, let's say, needs. So at least we have to modify our behavior, because otherwise the change will not happen. So in our mindset, we have to acknowledge the change, and that's why I believe that starting as educator to impose to our students something which is they have to challenge, also will help us to reflect how we have to change our behavior. Because by changing our behavior, we can change of course, the construction industry as well. So it's not a decision that we have to make alone. It's the entire society that I think now the problem is evident, and of course it's already in the agenda. But I can see still difficulties in implementation. Of course, it's not an easy task. But my point is that we have to embrace the change. We have to be ready to change our behavior. Otherwise, there will be no change at all, I think. I would like to see if there's any questions from the audience or from the room, I don't know, or from the virtual room. Yes.
One is you first.
Yes.
I think I have a couple of questions. So just want to make sure that we're not.
You want to come here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Actually, I've got a question for Mr. Solero. So thank you for your very for your inspirations on city sustainability and views. So in your presentation, you mentioned the criteria for regeneration of historic city by surveying, metro planning, design, and check. So I'm just curious of like how to develop those set of specifications for the checklist, and from your experience in working with historical cities. So what are the most challenging items in setting up these checklists? Thank you.
Elena, did you heard the question?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, her voice was interrupted. If you know some synthesis of what she said.
Come here, maybe?
Yeah.
I mean, she comes here, but
Thank you.
Right, sorry about that. So is it better now? Right, so thank you. So my question is, I'm really interested in your model of regenerating historic cities with surveying, metro planning, design and check. So I'm just curious of what are like how to develop those specifications for the checklist. And from your experience in working on historic cities, what are the most challenging items in setting up these checklists? Thank you.
Okay. Yes, no, that I don't practice that checklist. That was the study of Enea, that is a great agency in Italy, which gives some guidelines to how to face the sustainable methods for the different part of the city. So in the historical city, you have to adopt this approach, and the checklist is made in a different way. It depends on the type of buildings you have. So if you have a very historical building, you have to give some parameters and requirements. And while you do your analysis, you have to check that requirements that you have put, they are observed. But if you want, I can send some example of checklist. I can give to Francesco Rossini, and then I have to find this schedule about because it's a methodological tool. I have to find the application of this methodology to a building, a historical building.
Right, thank you. That was most helpful. Thank you.
Other questions for you? You wanna come? Yes, we have another question.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Actually, it's not a question. It's I just feel a little bit confused. Maybe it's an open discussion. I'm thinking the sustainable is for the. I think the definition of sustainable is to fulfill the requirement for this generation, but not sacrifice for the future. So I as understand, in the CHK, there's a lot of professors are researching for the Asian people, which means that our society is gradually to be an Asian society. So that is a kind of challenging for human beings. So the governments maybe recommend somebody like us to give more baby, and to increase to low down the Asian society and give more birth to the newborn. So that means that the population of human beings may be raised up, but the resource is limited. So what should we do to raise up the born rate, or just keep it stable at a certain level and make the crisis to be solved a little bit and then keep going? I'm not sure if I can express clear.
That's clear. Okay.
Really...
Let me attempt to respond to your questions. It's an interesting question. I saw a recent paper comparing, say, 50 years ago or 20 years ago. Okay, it's with this certain time span. what were the major changes that caused more carbon emissions? Over that lifespan, that time span, global population doubled, and economy 5 times, and also say human desire contributed by technologies 10 times, something like that. So if we are going to have more population, if based on what the data I shared with you, that is not the most imminent, important factor to cause global warming or the global carbon emissions. It's our lifestyle, our desire, facilitated by economy and technologies that we multiply our carbon footprint, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it's not a simple question, okay?
Yes,
It's not
yes.
a simple answer,
Yes.
but I'm sharing some data that what are really causing the problem globally are our lifestyles.
Yeah.
Secondly, our economy, third, population size. Okay.
Yeah, okay. So I actually also did a really interesting testing experiment during the course for green building design. I just have a model simulation to just slow down the power supply for the interior facilities, such as the electricity, lighting, or some cooling, heating. So this in Hong Kong, based on Hong Kong climate. So the general annual energy use intensity will be increased with 50%. So that is a real ideal case, but that means in this simulation, I just found whether the global warming or some crisis of the energy or resources is generated by ourselves. So what if we just do some to minimize the needs at a really significant level? It's not just a little, it's a significant level, just drop down. So does it can help to solve the problem? It's really, I'm not sure. It's really.
I think it's so. I think if we adopt measures, especially when you, Juliana, talk about the smart technologies, I think we all are monitored about everything, right? We have our phone that can tell us everything about what we do, about walking, stepping, and calories and stuff like that. But sometimes we are not achieving that level of complexity. For example, how much energy we use in our place. Somehow it's something obscure, right? If you have something that can measure for real, so you can see visually how you are concerned, because sometimes you are not used to. So there's people I know that leave the aircon open in the house in Hong Kong, right? So this should be somehow probably avoid, or at least design in a much better way that the house can be somehow livable, even if you close the air condition. I think that kind of stuff, when we came visually, I think like we can see in our phone. I mean, before you didn't know about, your consumptions of working by every day. You just look at the phone and say, oh, I'm improving, I'm doing better, I'm doing like that. I mean, something like that, maybe my view should be implemented.
I totally agree with your point. That's why I mentioned the smart meters transformation in Hong Kong that will be completed within a few years' time. So upon completion of that transformation of all meters into smart meters, we could have system to make them more visible for everyone, for every school. For instance, in the case that you go out away from your home and find out, how come your home still consuming a lot of energy? Yeah. Is it your maid spending a lot of power, or there are too many standby electricity consumption, something like that? So it would help you to be better informed, and hopefully that could help you to transform your behaviors. There are different means, but as Francisco mentioned, that how to make it more visualized, that could be one way to change the energy efficiency situation. And I have to add 2 points here, that globally, we will see the technology changing and more affordable zero carbon energy or electricity supply available. But that will take time. But during that transformation process, we have to change all our infrastructure from the coal or natural gas infrastructure into new ones. That transformation process, no matter you are in Hong Kong, Singapore, Milan, that will be very expensive. So that's why when we devise this climate action plan, we highlighted a few local challenges. One is the cost of decarbonization. You can see that the tariff, the electricity price has been escalating due to different reasons globally. So how to minimize that cost of change would be a very important social and economic challenge. So if everyone tries to minimize energy use through behavioral change or technological advancement, that will help you to reduce your bill. At the same time, to help to save the infrastructure investment for the entire city. So that is our mindset. Thank you.
Thank you. So other consideration we have, or think we can also remind, let's say, postpone the discussion in a few days, because actually, as you know, today was a preview of the 2 days event. So tomorrow we will do a break, so no activities, and then Friday it's your turn. So you have to explain us how you are going to solve those issues with your research. So it will be an important session. So we will know about the research that we are producing at UHK, the research that in Milan they are doing. Hopefully it will be a great session. So I welcome all to join. Links are advertised on social media, Instagram, on our websites. So I hope that all of you can join this day of symposium, and hopefully we can have answers. Yes, 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 we can have answers. Okay, so if there are no other points, I will close the session. And again, let me thank all of you, students, colleagues, calling me to be here today, all professors to join it. And have a nice evening, and see you in 2 days. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Francesco.
Thank you, Francesco. Bye.
Ciao Giuliana, ciao Elena. Ciao.
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 Grazie, ciao.
Ci vediamo a Milano. Ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao.